The air in the conference room was so cold it felt sharp, like tiny needles against the skin. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper. 6-year-old Lily sat on a leather chair so big her feet dangled a foot above the plush, silent carpet. Her legs, clad in pink leggings with a worn spot on the knee, swung back and forth, the rhythmic thump of her sneakers against the chair's mahogany base, the only sound in the cavernous room. Beside her, Maria Garcia twisted a damp tissue in her hands, her soft, round face pale. On the other side of a sprawling, mirror-bright table sat the man. He was tall and thin, like a figure cut from gray stone, and his suit was the color of a storm cloud. He hadn't smiled once. He just watched Lily with eyes that were as still and dark as the bottom of a well. A different man, one with a kind face but worried eyes, was reading from a stack of papers. The words were long and boring, words like provisional, guardianship, and finalized. Lily didn't understand them, but she understood the feeling they created in the room. It was the same feeling she got right before a thunderstorm, a heavy, buzzing quiet that meant something loud and scary was about to happen. Maria squeezed her hand, and the dampness of the tissue seeped into Lily's palm. The kind-faced man finally stopped reading. He cleared his throat and looked at the stone man. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice too loud now, "the court has approved your petition. All parental rights are hereby transferred to you. Congratulations. You are now the legal guardian of Lily." He trailed off as Lily's sneaker hit the chair with a final, defiant thud. The stone man, Mr. Sterling, allowed a flicker of something to cross his face. It wasn't a smile. It was something tighter, more painful. He stood up, his shadow stretching across the table to fall over Lily. "Lily," he said, and his voice was low and gravelly, like stones rolling downhill. "It's time to go home." Maria made a sound, a tiny, choked sob, and that was the spark. The buzzing quiet in Lily's chest exploded. She slid off the chair, landing on the thick carpet with a soft bump, and pointed a trembling finger at the man who was now her whole future. Her face scrunched up, hot tears welling in her eyes. "No!" The word ripped from her throat, raw and furious. "You can't make me. You're not my dad." The ride in the car was like being sealed in a silent, black box. The windows were so dark, Lily couldn't see the city rushing by, only blurry streaks of yellow and white light. She sat in the middle of a leather seat that was bigger than her bed at the Garcias' apartment, her small body rigid with anger. She had refused to let Mr. Sterling touch her, flinching away when he'd tried to buckle her seatbelt. A man with a thick neck and a cap on his head had done it instead, his movements quick and impersonal. Mr. Sterling sat in the front, a dark silhouette against the muted glow of the dashboard. He hadn't said another word to her since her outburst. The silence was worse than shouting. It was a heavy blanket she couldn't push away. She thought of Maria's face as they led her away, the tears finally spilling over and tracing paths through the powder on her cheeks. Maria had tried to hug her, but one of the suits, a woman this time, with a tight blonde bun, had gently steered Lily away, murmuring something about making things as smooth as possible. There was nothing smooth about it. It was jagged and sharp, a piece of glass in her heart. She missed them already. She missed the smell of frying onions and cilantro that always hung in their apartment, the sound of Hector's booming laugh when he came home from his construction job, the feel of Maria's arms around her, warm and safe and smelling of laundry soap. This car smelled of nothing. It was the smell of a void. They drove for a long time, the city's lights eventually giving way to a deeper, more complete darkness. Lily pressed her face to the cold window, trying to see anything familiar, but there was only black. Finally, the car slowed and turned, the tires crunching on what sounded like gravel. Huge iron gates, topped with golden spikes that looked like spears, swung open without a sound. They drove up a long, winding driveway lined with trees that were perfect skeletal shapes against the faint moonlight. And then she saw the house. It wasn't a house. It was a castle, a palace, something from a fairy tale, but it was all wrong. It was made of pale stone that seemed to glow, with dozens of dark windows like empty eyes. It looked cold and lonely. The car stopped under a grand portico, and the driver got out to open Mr. Sterling's door, then hers. Lily didn't move. She wrapped her arms around her knees and squeezed her eyes shut. She would not go into the scary, empty castle. Lily. Mr. Sterling's voice was right beside her. It wasn't angry, but it was firm, a voice that was used to being obeyed. She shook her head, pressing her face against her knees. She felt a cool hand on her shoulder, and she flinched, scrambling to the other side of the seat. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice cracking. There was a long pause. She heard him sigh, a quiet, weary sound. "Mrs. Gable is waiting inside. She's made you a room. It has everything a little girl could want." Lily didn't care what Mrs. Gable had made. She didn't want a new room. She wanted her old room, the tiny closet-sized space off the kitchen at the Garcias, with the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling and the lumpy mattress that smelled like her. "I want to go home," she said, the words muffled by her leggings. "This is your home now," he said, and the finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. A woman in a crisp black dress with a white apron appeared at the car door. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a face that was all sharp angles and thin lips. This must be Mrs. Gable. "Huh. Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice as starched as her apron. "Everything is prepared." Mr. Sterling looked from the woman to the small, defiant lump in the back of his car. He seemed, for the first time, uncertain. He was a man who moved markets with a single phone call, who bought and sold companies like they were chess pieces, but he was being defeated by a 6-year-old in pink leggings. "Perhaps you could—" he gestured vaguely. Mrs. Gable nodded, a single, sharp dip of her head. She leaned into the car. Her perfume was faint and smelled of lavender. "Come along, child," she said, her voice not unkind, but not warm either. It was the voice someone would use to address a piece of misplaced furniture. "There's no sense in making a fuss." Lily looked up at the woman's impassive face. There would be no comfort here. No soft arms, no gentle words. These people were made of the same stone as the house, but she was tired. The anger that had been a roaring fire was now just a pile of embers, and a deep, aching sadness was seeping into her bones. Slowly, she uncurled herself. She wouldn't take Mrs. Gable's offered hand. She slid out of the car and stood on the gravel, a tiny, solitary figure in the shadow of the enormous house. Mr. Sterling stood a few feet away, watching her. He had something in his hand. It was her backpack, a worn unicorn backpack that held her only possessions: a change of clothes, a half-eaten bag of gummy dinosaurs, and a well-loved one-eyed stuffed rabbit named Patches. Maria had packed it for her that morning, her hands trembling. He held it out to her. "You left this." Lily snatched it from him, her fingers brushing his for a second. His skin was cool and dry. She hugged the backpack to her chest, the familiar lump of Patches inside a small secret comfort. Without another word, she turned and followed Mrs. Gable up the wide stone steps and through a set of carved wooden doors that were bigger than a whole wall in the Garcia's apartment. The inside of the house was even bigger and colder than the outside. The entrance hall was a vast cavern of marble and dark wood. A gigantic crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling so high up it was lost in shadows, and a wide staircase swept upwards into the darkness. Their footsteps echoed, loud and lonely in the silence. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, a place where you weren't allowed to touch anything or make any noise. Mrs. Gable led her up the grand staircase, her hand a light, guiding pressure on Lily's back that Lily tried to shrug away from. They walked down a long hallway lined with closed doors and paintings of stern-faced people who seemed to watch her as she passed. Finally, Mrs. Gable stopped at a white door and pushed it open. "This is your room," she announced. Lily's jaw dropped. The room was bigger than the Garcias' entire living room and kitchen combined. It was a fantasy, a pink and white explosion of a princess's dream. A canopied bed with fluffy white curtains stood against one wall. A white vanity with a light-up mirror sat in a corner. Shelves overflowed with brand-new dolls in shiny boxes, board games still in their plastic wrap, and art supplies of every color. In the center of the room, a dollhouse the size of a small car stood waiting, its tiny rooms perfectly furnished. A walk-in closet was open, revealing racks of new clothes, dresses with bows and sparkles, shoes in neat rows. Mr. Sterling had said it had everything a little girl could want. He was wrong. It had everything, and that was the problem. It was too much. It was a room for a stranger, for some generic little girl he had read about in a catalog. None of it was hers. Lily walked slowly into the center of the room, the plush white carpet swallowing her footsteps. She looked at the rows of identical dolls with their perfect plastic smiles and felt nothing. She touched the canopy of the bed. The fabric was silky and cold. She thought of her lumpy bed, of the familiar weight of the quilt Maria's grandmother had made. She turned to Mrs. Gable, who was watching her from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Where's the bathroom?" Lily asked, her voice small. Mrs. Gable pointed to another white door. "Through there. It's fully stocked. If you require anything else, you may press the button beside your bed. It will summon me." Summon, like she was a genie. Lily nodded and walked toward the bathroom, her unicorn backpack clutched tightly in her arms. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, the cool wood a comfort against her back. The bathroom was just as absurdly luxurious as the bedroom, all white marble and gold taps. But Lily ignored it. She slid down to the floor, pulling patches out of her backpack. The rabbit's one-button eye stared up at her blankly. His fur was matted and worn thin in places from years of hugs. He smelled like home. He smelled like Maria. Lily buried her face in his soft, shabby body, and finally let the tears come. Silent sobs that shook her whole body in the cold, echoing silence of her new gilded cage. Alistair Sterling stood in the hallway, listening. He had followed them upstairs, keeping a discreet distance, and now he stood outside the closed bedroom door, a ghost in his own home. He heard the bathroom door click shut, and then nothing. Silence. He had expected more shouting, perhaps the sound of something being thrown. He had been prepared for a battle. This quiet was more unnerving. It was the quiet of surrender, or worse, of despair. He flexed his hands, a habit he had when a deal was going sideways. He had managed this entire process with the precision of a military campaign. He'd hired the best lawyers, the best private investigators. He had learned every detail of Lily's short life. Her mother's tragic death in a car accident 2 years prior. Her father listed as unknown on the birth certificate. Her subsequent placement in the foster system. He had tracked her to the Garcia family in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. The reports said they were good people, loving and stable, but they were poor. The case he'd built for the court was unassailable. He could offer the child opportunities, security, a future they never could. He had wealth that could move mountains. He had assumed that would be enough. He had assumed, with the breathtaking arrogance that had built his empire, that the child would be grateful. "You're not my dad," her words echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. He hadn't expected the sheer force of her rejection, the pure, undiluted hatred in her eyes. He was Alistair Sterling. People didn't say no to him. They cringed. They flattered. They begged. They did not scream at him. He ran a hand over his face. He was 45 years old and felt ancient. He looked down the long, silent hallway of his home. It was less a home and more a mausoleum, a monument to his success. It was filled with priceless art he barely looked at and furniture chosen by a decorator he'd never met. He ate his meals alone, his only companion the silent judgment of the portraits on the walls. He had built a fortress of solitude and hadn't realized until this moment how completely it had imprisoned him. He had thought bringing a child here would breathe life into the place. He'd had the top floor renovated, commissioning the world's most famous toy designers and child psychologists to create the perfect environment for a 6-year-old girl. A girl he had never met. A girl whose face he had only seen in photographs until today. Photographs that showed a laughing child with a spray of freckles across her nose and her mother's eyes. Isabella's eyes. That was the crux of it all. The secret he had guarded for months, the reason for this entire insane, world-altering endeavor. He walked back down the sweeping staircase, his hand trailing on the cool, polished wood. He went into his study, a room paneled in dark mahogany and lined with books he never read. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. From a locked drawer in his desk, he took out a worn, leather-bound photo album. He hadn't opened it in years. The pages were stiff. The first photo was of a young woman with a wild mane of dark, curly hair, paint smudged on her cheek, and a smile that could light up a starless sky. Isabella. They had met at a gallery opening almost 7 years ago. He had been a driven, ruthless young executive on the verge of his first major acquisition. She was a struggling artist who saw the world in vibrant colors he had never noticed. Their relationship was a whirlwind, a brief, passionate collision of two completely different worlds. He had been captivated by her fire, her refusal to be impressed by his money, her ability to find beauty in a crack in the sidewalk. But his world demanded all of him. The acquisition was a brutal, all-consuming battle, and he had let her slip away. He told himself it was for the best, that she didn't fit into his meticulously planned life. He had chosen his ambition over her. He never saw her again. She had disappeared, leaving only a short, cryptic note saying she had to go. It wasn't until his investigators, tasked with finding a suitable heir to his childless empire, had stumbled upon a cold case. An artist named Isabella Rossi, killed in a hit-and-run, leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter with no known father, that his carefully constructed world had shattered. The dates matched. The description matched. The PI had sent him a photo of the little girl, Lily, and in her defiant little face, he saw Isabella. The same stubborn set of her jaw, the same spray of freckles, the same dark, expressive eyes. A DNA test, conducted discreetly using a hair from a brush the foster agency had in storage, confirmed it. She was his daughter. The daughter he never knew he had, the living, breathing embodiment of his greatest regret. He had thought claiming her would be a way to atone for his past, to finally do the right thing. He would give her the world, everything he had denied her mother. But looking at the whiskey in his glass, the silence of his vast empty house pressing in on him, he realized he had made the same mistake twice. He had treated her like an acquisition, a problem to be solved with money and lawyers. He hadn't considered her heart at all, and now, a terrified, heartbroken little girl was crying herself to sleep in a princess-themed bedroom upstairs, clutching a one-eyed rabbit and hating him with every fiber of her being. He was her father, and she was right. He wasn't her dad. He hadn't earned that title. He had no idea how. The first week was a silent war. Lily communicated only in monosyllables or, more often, with stubborn silence and disapproving glares. She refused to wear any of the new clothes, insisting on wearing the few worn outfits from her unicorn backpack over and over. Mrs. Gable would wash them every night after Lily fell asleep, her lips pursed in a thin line, and they would be clean and folded on the chair by Lily's bed in the morning. Lily ate only toast, plain, untoasted bread, if she could get away with it. The personal chef, a cheerful Italian man named Marco who tried to tempt her with star-shaped pancakes and chocolate-drizzled waffles, was met with a stony wall of resistance. After 3 days of his culinary masterpieces being sent back untouched, he started leaving a plate with 2 slices of plain white bread and a small pat of butter on the massive dining room table for her at every meal. Lily would sit alone at the end of the table, a tiny figure in a room that could seat 40, and meticulously eat her bread, while the portraits of Alistair's ancestors looked down on her with painted disdain. Alistair tried to engage her. He would sit at the other end of the table, an impossibly long distance away, and ask about her day. "How was your day?" he'd ask, the question sounding awkward and foreign in his mouth. Lily would just shrug, her eyes fixed on her plate. He bought her a pony, a beautiful, gentle white pony, with a long, flowing mane, complete with a stable and a full-time groom. He showed it to her with a flourish, expecting at the very least a glimmer of excitement. Lily looked at the pony, then back at him. "What's its name?" she asked, her first unsolicited question. "Whatever you want to name it," Alistair said, a surge of hope rising in him. "It's yours." Lily thought for a moment. Can it go back to its real home now? The hope plummeted. He tried a different tactic. He set up a state-of-the-art home classroom and hired a private tutor, a young woman with a bright, encouraging smile named Miss Anya. Lily attended the lessons, but her participation was minimal. She would do the work, her printing neat and precise, but she wouldn't volunteer answers or engage in conversation. During a lesson about families, Miss Anya showed her pictures of different family structures: a mom and a dad, 2 moms, a single dad, grandparents. Then she held up a blank piece of paper. "Now can you draw your family for me, Lily?" Lily picked up a brown crayon and drew a small, lopsided house. Inside she drew 3 stick figures: a large smiling man with a hard hat, a smiling woman with curly hair, and a small girl with a ponytail holding their hands. Underneath she carefully printed the names: Hector, Maria, Lily. She slid the paper across the table to Miss Anya. There was no one else in the picture. Her only act of rebellion, her only true defiance, came in the form of Patches the rabbit. She carried him everywhere. He sat beside her at the dining table, on her desk during lessons, and on her lap as she stared out the window of the cavernous living room. Mrs. Gable was horrified. "Mr. Sterling, the object is unhygienic. It's shedding. It's an antique." "It's a stuffed animal, Mrs. Gable, not a Ming vase," Alistair snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Leave it." So Mrs. Gable left it, but she would watch the rabbit with an expression of deep loathing, as if it were a rat Lily had brought into the house. One afternoon, Lily couldn't find him. She had left him on her bed while she used the bathroom, and when she came back, he was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tore the room apart, pulling off the fluffy duvet, throwing pillows on the floor, looking under the bed and in the closet. He was nowhere. Tears of frustration streamed down her face. He was the only piece of her old life she had left. She ran out of her room and down the hallway, her socked feet silent on the thick runner. She didn't know who to ask. Miss Anya had gone home for the day. Mr. Sterling was in his study, the one place she was terrified to go. That left Mrs. Gable. She found the housekeeper in the laundry room, a vast, sterile white room in the basement, folding sheets with sharp, precise movements. "Where is he?" Lily demanded, her small body trembling with rage. Mrs. Gable didn't look up. "Where is who, child?" "Patches," Lily shouted. "You took him." Mrs. Gable folded a final corner, her movements unhurried. The item was soiled. I'm having it cleaned. He's not an item, Lily screamed, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. He's my friend. You stole him. Do not raise your voice to me, Mrs. Gable said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. She finally looked at Lily, her eyes like chips of ice. I am the head of this household. I will not have filthy, germ-ridden objects contaminating Mr. Sterling's home. Give him back, Lily sobbed, beating her small fists against the woman's stiff black dress. It was like hitting a wall. Mrs. Gable didn't even flinch. She simply caught Lily's wrists in one strong, cool hand. That is enough, she said. Hysteria will not be tolerated. What's going on here? Alistair's voice cut through the tension. He was standing in the doorway, his face a thunderous mask. He had clearly heard the shouting. Lily stopped struggling, her sobs quieting to ragged gasps. Mrs. Gable released her wrists but didn't look away from Alistair. The child was having a tantrum, sir. I was handling it. She stole patches, Lily cried, pointing an accusing finger. Alistair's eyes moved from Lily's tear-streaked face to the housekeeper's rigid posture. Mrs. Gable, where is the rabbit? It's being sanitized, Mr. Sterling, as per standard household hygiene protocols. Standard protocols do not apply to a 6-year-old's most prized possession, Alistair said, his voice dangerously soft. Get it, now. A flicker of something, defiance perhaps, crossed Mrs. Gable's face, but it was gone in an instant. She gave a stiff nod, turned, and walked toward a large industrial washing machine. She opened the door and pulled out a small, dripping wet and horribly misshapen lump of grayish fur. One of his seams had split, and a trail of soggy stuffing was hanging out. His one-button eye was gone. Lily let out a horrified wail. He was ruined. She had killed him. She had killed the last piece of Maria. Without a word, Alistair crossed the room, took the sad, wet lump from Mrs. Gable's hand, and knelt in front of Lily. He held it out. I'm sorry, Lily, he said, and his voice was rough with an emotion she didn't recognize. I'm so sorry. Lily stared at the destroyed rabbit, then up at the man's face. For the first time, she saw something other than stone. She saw a crack in the facade. She saw regret. She snatched the wet rabbit from his hand, clutching the soggy, ruined thing to her chest, and fled. She ran back up the stairs to her room, leaving Alistair Sterling kneeling on the cold tile floor of the laundry room, a trail of drips and stuffing marking the spot where his carefully planned world had once again fallen apart. That night, Alistair sat in his study, a sewing kit open on his desk. It was a cheap, plastic kit from a drawer in the laundry room, the kind meant for sewing on a loose button, not for major reconstructive surgery on a beloved stuffed animal. He held the damp, mangled rabbit under the light of his desk lamp. The creature was in a sorry state. Alistair Sterling, who could dissect a corporate balance sheet in seconds and spot a fatal flaw in a 100-page contract, was utterly flummoxed by a fistful of wet stuffing and torn fabric. He threaded a needle, painstakingly poking the thread through the tiny eye. His fingers, so adept at signing billion-dollar checks, felt clumsy and huge. He tried to push the stuffing back inside the rabbit's body, but it was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. He stitched the seam closed, his stitches large and uneven. The result was a lumpy, puckered scar. It looked worse than before. He searched for the button eye, but it was lost, a casualty of the industrial washing machine. He sighed in frustration, leaning back in his chair. This was hopeless. He was about to give up when his eyes landed on his cufflinks, a pair of simple, elegant black onyx stones set in platinum. On impulse, he unfastened one. It was the perfect size. He carefully stitched the cufflink into the spot where the button eye had been. It was absurd. A stuffed rabbit with $1,000 eye. It was the most Alastair Sterling solution imaginable, throwing money at a problem he didn't know how to solve, emotionally, but it was the best he could do. He took the now slightly heavier, lumpier, and more valuable rabbit and walked upstairs. He paused outside Lily's door, listening. He could hear a faint, hitching sound, the sound of a child trying to cry quietly. He knocked softly. The crying stopped. "Lily," he said through the door. "It's Alastair." He never knew what to call himself. Mr. Sterling was too formal. Father was a lie. Alastair felt inadequate. There was no answer. He knocked again. "Lily, I have something for you." He waited. Slowly, he heard the sound of her feet on the carpet, and the door opened a crack. A single, tear-filled eye peered out at him. He knelt down, so they were at eye level. He held out the rabbit. "I tried to fix him," he said quietly. "I couldn't find his eye, so I gave him a new one." Lily looked at Patches. Her gaze went to the new, shiny black eye, then to the clumsy, Frankenstein-like stitches. She reached out a small, hesitant hand and touched the onyx cufflink. It was cool and smooth. She took the rabbit from him, her fingers brushing his. She didn't snatch it away this time. She held Patches up, examining him in the dim light of the hallway. He looked strange, lopsided and scarred, but he was whole. He was still Patches. She looked back at Alastair, her expression unreadable. She didn't say thank you. But she didn't slam the door in his face either. She just stood there for a long moment, clutching her repaired friend before giving him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she closed the door, leaving him alone in the hallway again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a truce. It was, he thought with a flicker of hope that was as foreign as it was welcome, a beginning. The incident with the rabbit marked a subtle shift in their Cold War. Lily still didn't talk much, but the hard, defiant shell she had encased herself in began to show tiny cracks. She stopped leaving her food untouched, and Marco the chef nearly wept with joy the day she ate an entire star-shaped pancake. She started answering Miss Anya's questions with more than one-word answers. She even, one afternoon, asked Alastair a question. He was reading the Wall Street Journal in the library, a vast two-story room that smelled of leather and dust, when she appeared in the doorway, clutching Patches, who now sported his onyx eye with a rakish air. "Is it true you own a helicopter?" she asked. Alastair lowered his paper, surprised. "Yes, I do. Can it fly anywhere?" "Within reason. Anywhere in the city, certainly." She chewed on her lip, thinking. Can it fly to the Bronx? Alastair's heart gave a painful lurch. He knew what she was asking. "Yes, Lily," he said softly. "It can." "Oh," she said, and turned to leave. "Wait," he called after her. She paused, her back to him. He folded his newspaper and put it aside, giving her his full attention. "Would you like to see them?" Her shoulders tensed. She didn't turn around. "It's just, Maria's birthday is next week. I always made her a card." The confession was whispered, barely audible, but it hung in the vast, silent library like a thunderclap. He had access to the Garcia's file. He knew their birthdays, their social security numbers, their entire life histories. But he hadn't considered this. He hadn't considered the small, vital traditions that made up a family. "We can go," he said, his voice firm. "We'll go on her birthday. You can give her the card yourself." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and hope. "Really? I'll arrange it," he said. And for the first time since she had arrived in his house, Lily gave him a smile. It was a small, watery thing, barely a twitch of her lips, but it was a smile nonetheless. It was like seeing the sun for the first time after a long, hard winter. The days leading up to the visit were filled with a new energy. Lily spent hours in her room with the art supplies she had previously ignored, working on Maria's card. She was secretive about it, hiding it whenever he or Mrs. Gable came into the room. A sense of purpose had animated her. She chattered to Miss Anya. She ate her meals. She even named the pony. She called him Dave. Alistair found himself absurdly pleased by this. He also found himself dreading the visit. What if she didn't want to come back? What if, seeing the warmth and love of her old life, she refused to return to his cold, empty castle? The thought was a physical pain in his chest. He was her father, her legal guardian. He could force her. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that if he had to force her, he would have already lost. The day of the visit arrived, bright and clear. Lily was dressed and waiting by the door an hour before they were due to leave. She wore a pair of jeans and a t-shirt from her old wardrobe and clutched a large, brightly decorated envelope in her hand. She had refused his offer of the helicopter, saying it would be too show-offy. Instead, his driver, the same silent man from the first day, drove them in a discreet black sedan. As they drove out of the manicured, wealthy suburbs and into the bustling, chaotic streets of the Bronx, the change in Lily was palpable. She sat up straighter, her face pressed to the window, a look of recognition and excitement on her face. "That's Mr. Chen's market. He always gave me a piece of candy," she said, pointing. "And there's the park where my friend Sophia and I would play." The car was a bubble of wealth and silence moving through a world of noise and life. People yelled, music blared from open windows, the air smelled of exhaust fumes and street food. It was the world he had worked his entire life to escape, and it was the world she called home. The driver pulled up in front of a tired-looking brick apartment building, its fire escapes zigzagging up the front. Lily was out of the car before he'd even come to a complete stop, running for the front door without a backward glance. Alistair followed more slowly, feeling deeply, uncomfortably out of place in his tailored suit. He felt the eyes of people on the street on him, curious and resentful. He followed Lily up 3 flights of worn, creaking stairs. The hallway smelled of garlic and cleaning products. She stopped in front of apartment 3B and, without knocking, pushed the door open and ran inside. "Maria! Hector!" Alistair heard her yell. He paused in the doorway, an intruder in this sacred space. The apartment was small and crowded, but it was filled with a warmth that his mansion completely lacked. Colorful blankets were draped over the worn sofa, family photos covered every surface of the walls, and the air smelled of something delicious cooking. Maria Garcia came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw Lily, her face broke into a radiant smile, and she dropped to her knees, enveloping the little girl in a fierce hug. Hector appeared behind her, a big man with a kind face, and he ruffled Lily's hair, his booming laugh filling the small apartment. For a moment, they were a perfect picture of a family, and Alistair was the ghost looking in. Then Maria saw him standing in the doorway, and her smile faltered. She stood up, pulling Lily behind her slightly, a protective gesture. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice polite but cool. "We weren't expecting you." Lily wanted to bring you something," he said, gesturing awkwardly toward the envelope in Lily's hand. Lily squirmed out from behind Maria and held up the card. "Happy birthday, Maria. I made it myself." Maria took the card, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at the childish drawing on the front. A picture of the 3 of them, just like the one Lily had drawn for Miss Anya. "Oh, mija," she whispered, pulling Lily into another hug. "It's beautiful. Thank you." She looked up at Alistair over Lily's head, and her expression had softened. "Would you like to come in? I'm making arroz con pollo." Alistair was a man who had dined with kings and presidents. The idea of eating in this cramped, humble apartment was absurd. But the smell was incredible. and the warmth in the room was something he was starving for. "I'd like that very much," he said. The afternoon was a revelation. He sat on their lumpy sofa, which was surprisingly comfortable, and listened as Lily chattered away, telling the Garcias all about her new life. She told them about Dave the pony, about Miss Anya, and even about Patches's new onyx eye, a detail that made Hector chuckle. She talked more in those 2 hours than she had in the entire month she'd been with him. He watched her interact with them, the easy affection, the shared jokes, the comfortable silence. This was what a family was. It wasn't about blood or legal documents. It was about love and history and 1,000 tiny, shared moments. Maria served him a heaping plate of chicken and rice, and it was the best thing he had ever tasted. He ate 2 helpings. As the afternoon wore on, a familiar dread began to build in his chest. It was almost time to go. Lily's laughter died down, and a sad, quiet look came over her face as she saw him glance at his watch. "Is it time?" she asked, her voice small. Maria looked from Lily's face to Alistair's. She put a comforting arm around Lily's shoulders. "It's all right, Misha," she said softly. "You'll come visit again soon, won't she, Mr. Sterling?" Alistair met her gaze. He saw no resentment in her eyes, only a deep, abiding love for the child they both, in their own ways, claimed. "Whenever she wants," he said. The ride back to the mansion was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't angry or sad. It was thoughtful. Lily sat beside him, her head leaning against the cool glass of the window. As they pulled up the long gravel driveway back into the world of silence and manicured perfection, she didn't look sad. When the car stopped, she didn't hesitate. She got out, waited for him on the steps, and when he reached her, she did something that shocked him to his core. She reached out and took his hand. Her hand was small and warm in his. It was a simple, trusting gesture, and it felt more valuable than any company he had ever acquired. They walked up the steps together, hand in hand. They still had a long way to go. He still had so much to learn. But as they walked into the vast, echoing entrance hall of the cold stone house, it felt, for the very first time, a little bit less empty. It felt just for a moment like he was bringing his daughter home. The visit to the Garcias became a regular thing, a bridge between Lily's 2 worlds. Every other Saturday, Alistair would drive her to the Bronx, and he would sit in the small, warm apartment, eating Maria's food and listening to the easy chatter, feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign but fascinating culture. He started to learn things. He learned that Lily hated peas but loved mangoes, that her favorite color was not pink but a vibrant, sunny yellow, and that she had a surprisingly wicked sense of humor. He, in turn, started to open up to her, a little at a time. He told her stories about his own childhood, a lonely, regimented affair in a series of boarding schools. He told her about building his company from nothing, about the thrill of a deal and the crushing weight of responsibility. He found that talking to her was easy, that her straightforward, childish curiosity cut through his layers of corporate armor. He discovered he liked making her laugh. One day, he found her in the library, staring up at a large abstract painting that hung over the fireplace. It was a chaotic swirl of blues and greens, a piece he had bought at an auction on a whim and never really looked at since. "It's messy," she said. "Yes, I suppose it is," he replied. "I like it," she declared. "It looks like how I feel sometimes, all jumbled up inside." The observation was so simple, so profound, that it left him speechless. He had never considered that a painting could look like a feeling. He had only ever considered its monetary value. He looked at the painting again, really looked at it, and for the first time, he saw what she meant. He saw the anger and confusion, but also the beauty in the chaos. He was beginning to see the world through her eyes. His house, however, remained a point of contention. It was still too big, too quiet, too perfect. Lily's presence was a small island of life in an ocean of sterile silence. He realized the house had been designed for one person, a person who wanted to be left alone. It was not a home for a child. He called his decorator. "I want to change some things," he said, and proceeded to issue a series of commands that left the woman sputtering in disbelief. The formal living room, with its priceless antiques and silk wallpaper, was to be converted into a playroom. A real playroom, not the showroom on the third floor. He wanted a slide, a ball pit, a climbing wall. The manicured, prize-winning rose garden was to have a section dug up for a vegetable patch. "Lily likes mangoes," he explained to the horrified decorator. "We'll grow mangoes." It was a ridiculous notion. You couldn't grow mangoes in New York. But the point wasn't the mangoes. The point was the digging, the dirt, the imperfection. The biggest change was the dining room. He had the massive 40-foot table removed. In its place, he had a small, round wooden table installed, one that could seat 4 comfortably. The first time they ate at the new table, the change was immediate. They were close enough to talk without raising their voices, to pass the salt, to feel like two people sharing a meal instead of two monarchs holding court at opposite ends of a kingdom. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Lily looked at him with a curious expression. "Why don't you have any pictures of my mom?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He had pictures, of course, the album in his desk. But he had kept them hidden, a secret shrine to his own guilt and regret. He had told Lily that he had known her mother a long time ago, that they had been friends. But he had been vague on the details, unsure of how to explain the complicated truth to a 6-year-old. "I do," he said slowly. "I just keep them in my study." "Can I see them?" Her voice was small, hopeful. He hesitated. It felt like opening a wound. But then he looked at her face, at her mother's eyes staring back at him, and he knew he couldn't deny her. He couldn't deny himself. "Okay," he said. He led her into the mahogany-paneled study. The room felt different with her in it, less intimidating. He unlocked the desk drawer and took out the leather album. He sat on the floor, leaning against the desk, and patted the spot beside him. She sat down, tucking her legs underneath her. He opened the album to the first page. "This was your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Her name was Isabella." Lily stared at the picture of the vibrant, smiling young woman. She reached out a finger and traced the outline of her mother's face. "She's pretty," she whispered. He turned the pages, and for the next hour, he told her everything. He told her about how they met, about her mother's passion for painting, her infectious laugh, her crazy, wonderful view of the world. He told her about the beautiful, chaotic months they had spent together, and he told her, with an honesty that cost him dearly, about how he had let his work, his ambition, consume him. He told her how he had let her go. "I was a fool," he said, his voice raw. "I chose the wrong thing. I didn't know. I never knew about you. If I had known, Lily, I swear, everything would have been different." He didn't realize he was crying until he felt a small hand on his arm. He looked down, and Lily was looking up at him, her own eyes glistening with tears. She didn't say anything. She just leaned her head against his shoulder. He hesitantly put his arm around her, and she snuggled closer. They sat like that for a long time, two broken people finding comfort in each other. The ghost of the woman they had both loved and lost, binding them together in the silent, book-lined room. The album lay open on their laps, a testament to a past he couldn't change, but with the warm weight of his daughter leaning against him, he felt, for the first time, a sense of a future he might be able to get right. The story of Isabella became the new foundation of their relationship. The photo album migrated from the locked desk drawer to the coffee table in the library, and Lily would spend hours poring over the pictures, asking questions about the woman with the wild hair and bright smile. Alistair, in turn, found himself on a mission to reconstruct Isabella's life, not for legal reasons, but for Lily, for himself. He sent his investigators out again, this time with a new mandate. Find everything. They unearthed a storage unit Isabella had kept, paid for years in advance by a small annuity she had inherited. Alistair went himself to open it. The unit was small and dusty, filled with canvases, boxes of old sketchbooks, and art supplies. It smelled of turpentine and dried paint. It smelled of her. He spent the entire day there, carefully going through her life's work. Her paintings were vibrant and full of emotion, just like she had been. But it was the sketchbooks that were the real treasure. They were filled with drawings of everything: strangers on the subway, flowers in a park, her own hands. And then he found it. A sketchbook from 7 years ago. In it were dozens of charcoal sketches of a young man in a suit, his face serious and intense, caught in moments he wasn't aware of. Reading a newspaper, talking on the phone, staring out a window. It was him. He had never known she was drawing him. He flipped through the pages, his heart pounding. And then, near the end of the book, he found a series of sketches that made him stop breathing. They were self-portraits of Isabella, her face rounder, a serene smile on her lips. In each one, she was cradling a small but definite baby bump. The final drawing was of a tiny, sleeping infant, its face a perfect little bundle of peace. Underneath, in Isabella's elegant script, was a single word: Lily. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own world that he had missed everything. She hadn't just left. She had left to have their child, to protect her, perhaps, from the cold, ruthless world he inhabited. He brought everything back to the house. He converted one of the empty guest suites into a gallery and hung Isabella's paintings on the walls. It became Lily's favorite room in the house. She would walk through it, touching the canvases, talking to the portraits of her mother. One afternoon, Alistair found her there, sitting on the floor with a sketchbook of her own, trying to copy one of Isabella's paintings of a sunflower. Her tongue was stuck out in concentration, her brow furrowed. "It's hard," she said without looking up. She was really good. "Yes, she was," Alistair said, sitting down beside her. He looked at her drawing. It was clumsy and childish, but it had a certain life to it, a vibrancy that reminded him of Isabella's work. "You have her hands," he said softly. "She used to say she had painter's hands." Lily looked down at her own small, paint-smudged fingers. "Really?" "Really." He picked up a piece of charcoal. "She taught me how to draw a little. She said the first step is not to draw what you think you see, but what you actually see. Look at the shadows, not just the petals." He started to sketch on her pad, showing her how to capture the curve of a leaf, the deep, dark center of the flower. Lily watched, mesmerized. Soon she took the charcoal from him and started to draw again, her movements more confident. They spent the rest of the afternoon like that, drawing together in the sun-filled gallery, surrounded by the vibrant, colorful legacy of the woman who connected them. They were not just a billionaire and an orphan anymore. They were a father and a daughter, learning how to build a family from the pieces of a love story that had been cut short too soon. The house was changing. It was no longer a silent mausoleum. It was filled with the sounds of Lily's laughter, the smell of oil paints, and the slightly off-key tunes she would hum as she worked on her drawings. Mrs. Gable had even softened. Alistair had caught her smiling once, a genuine smile, as she watched Lily trying to teach Dave the pony how to shake hands. Even she couldn't resist the force of nature that was Lily. But there was one last ghost that needed to be laid to rest. One more bridge to build. One Saturday, instead of driving to the Bronx, Alistair took Lily to a small, quiet cemetery in Queens. He led her by the hand through the rows of headstones until they came to a simple granite marker. Isabella Rossi, beloved mother, cherished artist. Lily traced the letters with her finger. She had brought the sunflower she had drawn, now framed, and she placed it carefully at the base of the stone. They stood there in silence for a long time. The sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees overhead. "I miss her," Lily said, her voice a small whisper. "Even though I don't remember her very much. I miss her." "I miss her too," Alistair said, his voice thick. "Every day." He knelt down beside Lily and put his arm around her. "But you know what? She would be so proud of you, Lily. You are fierce and kind and funny, and you see the world in beautiful, bright colors, just like she did. She's not gone. She's right here." He tapped her gently on the chest, right over her heart. Lily looked up at him, her dark eyes, her mother's eyes, shining with unshed tears. She leaned into his embrace, her small body fitting perfectly against his. "I know," she whispered. "She's in you too." He held her tight, a wave of love so powerful it almost knocked him over, washing through him. In that quiet cemetery, standing before the grave of the woman who had given them both life, they finally found their peace. He was no longer just Alistair Sterling, the billionaire. And she was no longer just Lily, the orphan. They were family. As they turned to leave, walking hand in hand back toward the car, Lily paused and looked up at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Alistair?" she said. "Yes, Lily?" "It's okay," she said, her voice clear and sure. "You can be my dad now, if you want." Alistair stopped walking. He looked down at the small, serious face of his daughter, the girl who had fought him, defied him, and ultimately saved him from himself. A slow smile spread across his face, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire stony demeanor. "I want that very much," he said, his voice cracking. "I want that more than anything in the world." And as they walked away, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them, they stepped out of the shadows and into the bright, warm sunlight of their future.